Welcome back to the Disability Tangent Podcast. In today's episode, we're thrilled to introduce you to two extraordinary individuals from the 2023 to 24 cohort of the Illinois Leadership and Education in Neurodevelopmental and Related Disorders program at the University of Illinois at Chicago.
Join us as we delve into their inspiring journeys and the impactful work they're doing in their respective fields and with getting this podcast off the ground.
We couldn't have done it without you.
We really couldn't have.
Just to alert our sensitive viewers, this episode may contain a bit of coarse language.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christy Blumendahl.
And my name is Rocco Catroni, and we are the Disability Tangent Podcast.
Each episode, we talk about current issues affecting communities while supporting people with disabilities.
Through research, community connections, and resource sharing, we hope to invite everybody to challenge their perceptions of people with disabilities and promote a more inclusive world.
Defined by what the people actually want and not what others think they want.
Come join us on this journey.
Our episode today is about Hannah and Sydney. Well, it is about them, yes, but it is also with them. They are our guests, and I will have them introduce themselves in a moment, but they have been our fabulous fellows behind the scenes this entire year at the Disability Tangent. So a lot of the work that is coming out has been, what's the word I'm looking for? Yes, I'm going to say it's been like a lot of their brains and their brawn and their research. All of it has been poured into these episodes, and they have been phenomenal, and we are so grateful for them. And today we want to have them on to talk about the Illinois LEND program that they have been a part of, which is what brought them to us, and also some of the things that have been impactful for them about being a part of the Disability Tangent team and a part of LEND. So I'll have them introduce themselves, and then Rocco can introduce LEND a little bit, and then we'll go from there.
So I'm Hannah. I'm from the suburbs of Chicago. I went to undergrad at Indiana University, and I majored there in exercise science with a minor in nutrition. I'm currently in graduate school at University of Illinois at Chicago to be a physical therapist. So I'm in their DPT program along with Sydney, set to graduate next year. And through the DPT program is how we found about LEND and did that application process and have been a training LEND fellow this past year.
My name is Sydney Liebenberg, and I am a LEND fellow, as well as I am from South Africa. So I came to the U.S. To mainly do diving. So I was involved in the UIC swim and dive team. And so I did my undergrad at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where I majored in rehabilitation science and minored in psychology and disability and human development. And yeah, now I'm in physical therapy school with Hannah, and we're about to start our clinical experience. So we're in our second year, and then we have one more year left until we graduate.
Thank you for introducing yourselves. And just as a note for listeners about what LEND is, this is the Leadership in Education and Neurodevelopmental and Related Disorders. So Illinois LEND is a year-long fellowship where every week there's various topics presented by a bunch of different people, advocates in the field, different professionals, you name it, talking about different disability considerations, different ways to make the world a little bit more inclusive and accessible for the people that are living within it. And as part of that program, there's a project that fellows have to go through in order to make that impact on the communities in which they serve. And Sydney and Hannah were, I should say, Christy and I were lucky enough to have Sydney and Hannah as part of this project to not only push forward and disseminate this important information, but also start connecting local, international, and national disability organizations that are supporting individuals with varying needs around the world. And it's just been such an incredible experience trying to do this, getting this off the ground, starting to do this work. And as a Illinois LEND Fellow graduate myself from a few years ago, I won't say how many, I'm really appreciative of the work that's being put into this, and that program has just been amazing. And a lot of the stuff that has been talked about on this podcast was directly things that I have learned through there and have connected with the wonderful people at the Illinois Lend program at UIC. So that is what Illinois Lend is, and that's why we're here today. So again, thank you, seriously, Hannah and Sydney. I know we're probably going to say this about 600 times, but this seriously would not have happened without both of you. I think Christy and I are very much the, oh, heck yeah, let's do this, and like super pumped and powerful to say, yes, it's time. We really need to make this happen. Let's connect the people. And Sydney and Hannah did an excellent job reining us in and saying, all right, cool, but here's how to carry this out in a way that makes sense, and have really created processes to make this happen. This podcast would not have happened without you two. So thank you.
Of course, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, I agree.
Of course. It's been an amazing process working with you. And I think that one of the things that I really want to ask you about this process has been like, what things maybe surprised you about working on the project? I know that we had to submit like oh, here's what we're going to do, this is how we're going to work together, these are the things that you're going to have to do. And I know that we probably didn't follow that script in many ways because this was a very new project and you ended up doing a lot of the development work with us. So I don't necessarily mean what surprised you about that, but what surprised you more about the people that you were researching or the topics, or was there anything that just really came up for you and you were like, oh, hey, I didn't really know that, and that was really important for me to learn during this process?
Yeah, I think as a whole, starting with you guys from ground zero on this whole project has really been beneficial, working together to get the end products out, like starting from the very beginning of finding someone to research and get more information about in order to create the episode and then put the episode out, I think has been a really cool process. I would say one of the episode and the research that went along with it that really sticks out to me still is the travel episode, which is where we started, I would say. And I think the reason that stood out to me the most is my family does a lot of travel, and we have ever since I was little. And as much as I don't like to admit it, the things that came up when researching traveling with a disability never really crossed mine or my family's minds as we pursued our travels. None of us identify with having a disability, so I just don't think a lot of these things came across our desks as we were planning our trips and seeing what hotel we were going to stay out. So I think doing the research for that episode really brought a lot of things to light that then I have seen directly correlate to specifically like our neuro class this semester. And now I'm more familiar with all these things when we're talking about wheelchairs and the type of wheelchairs for different kinds of injuries and disabilities. I think is all really clicking and just more apparent in my life now that I'm like looking for it because I've done all this
Yeah.
research.
I would say similarly to Hannah, what surprised me is como the lack of resources too. I think through researching, we can see that like society as a whole has come a long way from where it used to be. And when it was even first talked during my undergrad experience with disability and human development minor, a lot of that conversation was talked about. But I feel like now through even Katerina or any of the other advocates that are more on social media, this conversation is being talked about a lot more. And these companies like Delta are taking it more seriously and catering for all individuals instead of just the quote unquote normal individual. And I feel like it was an eye opening experience to see that at least these conversations are being talked about. It's still not where we want it to be, but there are companies that are investing in this, even with Gavin and his company, and all these resources and organizations are coming out, which is like really fun to see. And yeah, just cool to see that more of this is happening, even though it's not exactly where we want it to be right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
I totally agree with that too. Going through this process, and even a lot of the materials that you all have found for the work that we're doing here are just things that I've never seen before. Having gone through the Len Fellowship, having this be a major area of research for me, being disabled myself and having to take advantage of some of these things. There's still just so much out there that people are doing that has to be highlighted. If you create that environment of success, people will be able to access the world in a different way. But if we don't know how to access those things or that those things even exist, that's something that just goes to the wayside. So it's been really cool seeing that as you've been figuring out this information, and we've been doing this process as well.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's one of the things that I felt this podcast is really trying to highlight too, is to create awareness around organizations or individuals that can shed light on these resources that are available. It's just like not widely known. And so I feel like that is a really cool mission behind this podcast as well.
So, thinking of some of the work that both of you have done going through this process, and I know we've also worked on quite a bit of other episodes that will be coming up in the coming months as well. What has been your favorite episode so far? Like your favorite topic that you've gone through that has really shed light on maybe things you didn't know before? I know, Hannah, you talked about the travel episode, but as you're going through this process, what were some of those topics that really sparked interest and joy as you were looking through this?
I'd say, in addition to the travel episode, also Gavin's episode and seeing the work that he's doing and like putting in to his Welcome Me, I think it's really neat knowing that hopefully if he is able to spread awareness for that business that he's created and expand it to the US and other places, that could ideally be a readily available resource to those with disabilities, just to lessen the load that they already have to go to on a day-to-day basis. And we've talked about the spoon theory and having them be able to maybe save some of their spoons because of this Welcome Me that he has created, I think is a really neat cause that to hear about and learn about.
I'd say for me, with just on the research side, I know an episode hasn't been recorded over this topic, but the topic that has come up is you're too young to be disabled. And I think just through researching with that is just, I went on this whole like caveat, like tangent on what society kind of defines as beautiful and pretty and how those norms, where those norms have come from, and it's come a lot from like symmetry in people. And so I just found that to be interesting as well, and how that kind of ties into disabilities and how society can deem you're too young to be disabled, you're too pretty to be disabled, and just the shocking horrors behind all of that. So I think that opened my eyes to that realm and that world of thinking as well. But I don't know if I'm allowed to say
Oh,
something that we haven't recorded yet.
yes,
No, I
absolutely.
definitely
And
think you
I think
could.
like
Yeah.
I made mention of it already in our woke episode that about pretty privilege. I said something about Rocco and I having pretty privilege, and he disagreed because he said he's not pretty. But I was like, we have a reasonable amount of it.
Not fishing for compliments, by the
But
way.
I said we have a reasonable amount of attractiveness given the societal standard. And I think that probably part of why that came up for me is because we had a conversation about your research that you were doing on that topic. So yes, stay tuned, people, because we are going to get to this topic of ageism, and then also another one, because I think we're probably going to split it into two, where we talk about attractiveness and how does that function in our discussion of disability. So yeah, I really love that you both just always connected with this information in ways that we didn't even really ask you to. Like, you really dug into stuff and we're like, oh, hey, what does this mean? And how does this affect me? And how does it affect other people? And we were always so impressed with you because we would give you a task and then you would come back with all of this very aware, very connected, very deep kind of research that you had done. And we were like, oh my gosh, they they just nailed that. That was so great. And it was very wonderful for us we were consistently feeling so grateful. We would get off of a meeting with you, and Rocco and I would be like, oh, wow, that was amazing. That was so great. It was just lovely to see how you interacted with this material and just made it your own. And I think have really made some changes to how you adapt and how you see the world because of that. And one question that maybe comes out of that is, how do you see what you've learned in Lend and what you've learned during this podcast process shaping what you do next in life, working in physical therapy or whatever you decide to do with your degrees moving forward?
I think a big part of it through Lend and just the research behind all this podcast episodes and everything is especially like the language being used around those with disabilities or without disabilities, even as well, and just how we're approaching our future patients and our future patients' families. In the PT program, they really emphasize like a therapeutic alliance. So really forming a relationship, obviously appropriate, and like a bond with your patients in order for them to have the best outcomes and really get that buy into therapy can be really important. So I think depending on how they identify and as with a disability, their gender, their sexuality, kind of anything around that, making sure you're using proper terminology that they specifically identify with can really increase that therapeutic alliance that you have with them in order for them. It's shown and proven that like the more they want to be in therapy and internal motivation really shows more positive outcomes than if they're just going because let's say their doctor referred them or anything. So I think that is definitely going to be something I take away for the rest of my career with my future patients.
Yeah, and I think for me, something that I learned through Land as well as through this is just that how privileged I was to grow up in a world that was catered and designed for my needs, and how this isn't really the case for everyone, and how it just opened my eyes to more of the inequalities that people can face on a daily basis. Encouraged me to want to share awareness on these situations and trying to help make environments more accessible. I think through a physical therapy lens, this is something that we can do. I know in the past, physical therapy was looked at like fixing, quote unquote, fixing the physical parts of someone, but I think it's really adapted to this more adaptive lifestyle, and how can we work, as Hannah said, with our patients and our patients' families to best serve their needs and prioritize their goals and their needs above anything else. And so I think it just made me take a step back and look at, yeah, just the privilege that I've been grateful to have, but that this is not the case for everyone. And the patients that are going to walk through my doors, this is not the case for them. And kind of meeting patients where they are at and having the understanding to realize that they might be going through something that's completely different from you. And this is an opportunity that you can really learn from them and help put their needs first in your way of treating them and serving them.
I absolutely love that. Also, as an educator on how this looks, I'm really glad that those were the things that were pulled from these experiences. But it's something that I think a lot of professionals take for granted, that we are supposed to do these things. And when those things are taken for granted, or it's maybe your practicum site will look at this, or maybe your internship site or your clinical site, and then the clinical site saying, well, maybe the school will have to look at some of these things as well. And it seems like everybody's pointing at each other and not necessarily always addressing exactly what that means. I've seen a lot of people saying, be human or be supportive, and it's not really followed with a definition or examples or direct training on those kinds of things. So the fact that you're doing this fellowship and you're getting this information out of that is perfect. And I really hope that as you do that yourself and you get your own students in the future, your own patients and clients and communities you serve, that you continue spreading how to do that and exemplify that work that you've been learning throughout this time. And I'm already seeing it in the stuff that you're doing now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, agreed. And it feels good that we were able to be a part of that process as well. I feel really just grateful and privileged to be a part of that process. And I think For Rocco and I, that's our goal with even starting this podcast or doing this, right? Is to help build that awareness everywhere. And if we were able to look at you too as a microcosm of this macro kind of thing that we want to create, then I say that we have huge success, because to hear you say that you've gained these insights throughout this program and throughout working on the podcast just, yeah, makes my heart very full, because that is the goal. That is what we want to spread. So I feel happy about being a part of that process. And I hope that we've been able to foster even a small part of that for you. Rocco, you have another question?
What'd you say, Christy? It broke out there for a second. What?
What?
What? What?
Mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling.
Okay, sorry. Tangent. All right, go ahead.
Tangent 4. We're doing it. Cindy and Hannah, I know you talked about the impact of the work that you're doing with this and kind of some of the key takeaways, but what would you tell future students about experiences like this, or just experiences that you've been through and encountered throughout your LEND program? Like, would you suggest other people doing stuff like this? If so, what would that look like? What should they be focusing on? What are some things you learned along the way? I know it's like a 7-part question here, but I guess let me be more parsimonious. Throughout your experience in this particular internship and through your fellowship, what are things that you would want students to know, or future people considering this, before, starting an experience like this or thinking about doing something like this? What would you say to those students?
I think for sure, the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. I think that is huge. And I remember during our LEND orientation, one of the LEND fellows from last year, there was like a panel where we could ask them questions about LEND and for our upcoming year. And that was the advice that one of the girls had given. And it really stuck with me. And I think it is the most true thing ever. I think even in life in general, it's a great lesson. But I know like you and Christy are always so nice and gracious and caring about giving us such positive feedback on our work and like how impressed you guys are with us. But honestly, I feel that if I'm just going to give half an effort to something, it's not going to be worth my time. So if I am given the opportunity that I haven't given, being accepted as a LEND fellow and onto your guys' project, that like I want to do the most that I can do for you guys, the LEND program itself, and additionally for myself. I think that I have learned so much through this because I put in the effort. And when we research, I'm not going to find 1 or 2 articles. One, because I know that's not going to help you in your podcast journey, and I don't want to be the reason for that. So I'm going to throw 7 and see what you guys want out of it. But also because tangents can happen like while we're speaking, as you guys always say, but also a rabbit hole through this research, I feel, is our own form of tangent as well. And I feel like that's what happens a lot of time when we do this research. So I think definitely like the more you put into it, the more you're going to see yourself get out of it and feel satisfied and fulfilled through the research, through the LEND training, and all of it combined as well.
Yeah, I would agree with what Hannah said. I would also say that if you were like on the fence about doing something like this, I would encourage you to do it. Just because if you're someone like me who learns from people or learns from other people's experiences, I think LEND is such an amazing way to see that world outside of your own, to see what other people are going through that you might not be aware of, and you can learn from their situations or what they've been through. And it's such a safe, controlled environment to be able to learn. The people in LEND are so loving and so willing and accepting, so you never have to feel like you're going to get something wrong. And so it's a very safe space, I would say, to learn. As well, with working with Rocco and Christy, I feel like you guys have taught us a lot as well. And like Hannah was mentioning, every time we do something, you always have positive things to say. And that's really encouraging from someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience in this realm or with the different topics that we were researching. You guys are always positive and helpful with your criticisms and critiques. So that was a really fun experience. And then, yeah, I would just say, a way to continue to like advance yourself as a professional or even as a human being is surrounding yourself with different people that don't look like you, and that's the best way that you're going to learn what other people go through. And so surrounding yourself with people that don't look like you, and that's what Lend encompasses. It's different professionals in their professional world, but then also just different people that have gone through different experiences in life. And so it all creates a learning environment, I would say.
That was wonderful, and I'm really glad the cameras are off. I appreciate the kind words about that and the safety, trying to create, because I think that's something that we're trying to be intentional about on that, because Christy and I have definitely been in situations where it didn't feel like that, and I'm glad that kind of came through. At the same time, you were part of that. You both were really good at accepting that any kind of feedback we had and opening that up for us to feel comfortable being able to do that with you. And the praise was also reciprocated. You all did the same for us as well. So I think it definitely takes a team to make that environment possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I just think like that theme comes through over and over, right? To create space where people are different and feel comfortable in that difference, feel accepted, feel a sense of belonging regardless of differences. And I feel like, yeah, Gavin talks about this. Katerina talked about developing your cross disability community, and if you're non-disabled, like being around disabled people. And we get to these conversations about intersectionality, and that's about being around people who are different than you. And I think that is key to so many of these discussions. And so the fact that you bring that up is really important, I think, because it is a theme that just is on repeat with a lot of these guests that we're speaking to and a lot of these expert voices. And so I appreciate that you bring that up as well. Yeah.
So looking forward in your own experiences now, what's next for you all? Like this Lend Fellowship is coming up. I know you all have your white coat ceremony today. What's next in the careers of Sydney and Hannah?
It's a great question. I think that one of the reasons that I wanted to join Lend last year was because I was undecided and lost in my future with PT. A lot of things sounded interesting and cool to me, but thinking about like the rest of my life, what would be interesting and cool is where I felt stuck. So I wanted to join Lend just to get more information about anything really at that point, and like the pediatric or neurological component being interesting to me, I felt it was a good place to start. Recently, and through one of our classes this semester, I think, don't hold me to it, but I think I really like the neuro population of PT. So, working with like stroke, spinal cord, Parkinson's, kind of other progressive diseases, I think is where I want to go. We have 3 clinicals to wrap up our DPT curriculum. So hopefully through those as well, I'll find out more about what I truly want to keep doing in the PT realm. But I think definitely using Lend and you guys in my back pocket and like having these experiences with the advocacy for disability, I think is something I could definitely see me taking to like my future workplace and spreading that awareness as well. I think is something I would like to do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I am not 100% sure yet, if I'm being honest. I think the reason why I chose to do Lend was because I was really interested in working within the pediatric setting. And similar to Hannah, my focus has broadened a little bit more to the neurological setting. And so I'm hoping to get a little bit more experience in both those settings with clinicals and to really like hone in where I can see myself as a future physical therapist. So stay tuned to what kind of population I'll work with. But I think from undergrad till now, this underlying kind of disability studies slash advocacy has really stuck out. I think it's just something that really opened my eyes. I got opened up to in undergrad, and I think it's not going to leave me. And I think trying to get more continuing in the advocacy world, just because, as I mentioned already, I feel like I was truly privileged in the like upbringing that I had, but I know this isn't the case for everyone. And so if I can help shed more awareness or light in these different realms, that's where my passion lies as well. I want to try and make the world more accessible for others, whether that's as a physical therapist or as an advocate or whatever that looks like. But I think that passion does underlie my experience as well. But I just want to make sure that wherever I do end up, that I'm still creating awareness, still advocating for the right things. And just because I know this common theme of this is not the case for everyone. And so the little bit that I can help contribute towards that is going to help me feel like I'm living more of a fulfilled life.
That was beautiful. I really like the values orientation of that, of saying like, how are pieces like this that you're learning and what kinds of trajectories you're on to try to notice new ways you can approach the world. And I think that's pretty cool to be able to apply that. And I don't know, to put my professor hat on here again, I really appreciate that insight that both of you have about what you're looking at, where you started with your program in general, and where you've ended up at this point. And if there's anything I can leave you with on that, please just keep challenging that and keep noticing those things that are bringing you joy, that are affecting the community positively, and follow the dopamine. I mean, when you have that positive feel and that passion for it, everything else starts falling in place, and people can see that and read that and feel that. And that helps your clients and helps the people and communities you serve at the end of the day to be a partner in that change and that inclusive change. Seriously, that's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And while you were speaking, I was thinking of this Toni Morrison quote: if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, your job is to empower somebody else. I don't know if that's the exact quote, but I think that's pretty close. We'll find it. We'll put it in the show notes. But that's the sense that I was getting while you were speaking. Is there are many of us who have had some sort of privilege, and that's not something that we need to feel bad about or guilty over, right? But that's a thing that has to remind us that we have that for a reason. And the reason is not to walk around going, oh, I have some privilege, but then the reason is so that we can then utilize it in ways that are helpful and empowering for others. And so as I hear you speaking, I hear you saying, these are the things I want to do with what I've been given. And I want to take my privilege and my learning and my understanding, and I want to go and I want to do good things with it. And that is lovely for me to hear. I'm so impressed with you as people, with the work that you're doing, with the work that you intend to do. So wherever you land, I know it will be great. And Hannah, where you land might be where I land, but for different reasons, Like I might show up in your clinic with my essential tremor getting worse every day and be like, hey, it's Hannah. I get to work with Hannah. She's going to work on my arm. It would be fantastic.
We would be delighted to have you.
My neurological disease will be your livelihood. Woohoo!
Oh my gosh.
You got to find the bright side, Rocco. You gotta. If you can't laugh at your neurological disorder, then what are you supposed to do with it?
I feel like all these nice things that everybody's saying, this feels like the end of a song or something, or some kind of lyric where we're all just like,
no, you're great.
No, you're great. This is great. Everything's
You're the
awesome.
best. No, you're the best. You hang up first. No, you hang up first.
I'm thinking, we went through some of the broader ththings that we usually talk about in these episodes and like introducing people. What are some of the kind of key takeaways? And I think you both did that brilliantly. At this point, is there anything that we haven't covered so far that you want people to know or that you want to dive into?
I feel like I've said this already, but I can say it again. I think the only thing that was popping more in my head was just like sometimes people can say like you truly are made up of the people that you surround yourself with. And I've heard this analogy that if you like look at your life as like having a dinner party and seeing who you would have at your dinner table. And I think to truly make yourself a more educated individual, I think having different people from like different races, sexuality, gender, at your dinner table will help form you as an individual. And so I think through Lend and even through this podcast has helped me to see that, to really emphasize that in my own life and trying to carry out that I truly am surrounding myself with different people who don't look like me to gain more experience from them. And I think that will also attribute you to a better clinician or a better professional as well. So that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, I think a similar message that of Sydney is don't keep yourself in a box. While it's can be really comfy and safe in there, it is good to step outside the box sometimes and do something that maybe isn't your first instinct in order to get those experiences that you wouldn't get if you stayed in your comfy cozy little box. I think that for me it's really easy to not push myself if I don't have to and if no one's like giving me a little nudge. But I think like me moving to the city and going into PT school while all my other friends are like working 9 to 5s and regular jobs has been one step in that direction. And just the people that I've met through the PT program and through Lend now and with you guys, I would never have had these experiences if I didn't do the extra application that was required for Lend or anything like that, where like, yeah, it may have saved like 2 hours of filling out an application or whatever, but I wouldn't have gotten all these experiences. So I just think that like never staying too comfortable in life is always good as well.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And I feel like we did push you a little bit outside of your comfort zone. I think today is a little outside your comfort zone being interviewed for the podcast. And I think there's definitely ways that we pushed you not just to do research, but to reach out to people, try to find people to come on the podcast. That's a little bit daunting to reach out to strangers, like do cold calls, be like, hey, do you want to be on this podcast? We don't have anything to show you because we haven't recorded yet, but how about it? So there's definitely some experiences there that have been, yeah, a little bit of a challenge. What would you say has been the biggest challenge, maybe, in this process?
For the podcast, I think some of the background work, like for me creating the website or like the social media posts for business and not like my own personal doing, is obviously a very different task and one that I've never done before, but like it had to get done somehow. And honestly, I had fun with it doing like the more creative stuff since I feel like in my day to day with school, I'm like sitting in my computer doing work and not having fun, like choosing the color of a background. So while it was challenging and channeled my brain in a different way that it's used to, it also ended up being fun.
I think for me, the biggest challenge was managing my time correctly, I guess. I think being part of Lend and this podcast were amazing experiences to be a part of. However, it is like an added on top of everything else that we have to do. And so I found myself at times struggling to give my all into things that I really wanted to do. For example, Lend and this podcast, I wanted to like continue researching. I wanted to reach out to more people. I wanted to continue on different topics. It's just there were these day-to-day things that kind of prohibited me from giving my time. And what Hannah had talked about earlier is like putting your all into something. And it was, I felt hard to do that at times just because there are only infinite amount of hours in the day. And so I found myself torn between kind of wanting to go the extra mile, but realizing that I still needed to study for the exam tomorrow and those sort of things. So I think for me, the biggest challenge was time management and balancing my plate as well. So it is a big time commitment, but it was definitely rewarding.
Yeah.
I think to echo that too, that is something that Christy and I have talked about a lot, and who is bouncing off of who, even on this side. This work is hard. And I think that kind of was highlighted, at least for me, as we went through this process as well, of how do we make this a good experience for you all? How do we stay true to the values that we have? But how do we also do this in a way where we're not losing little parts of our ability to handle the day-to-day things? Because obviously the podcast is not the only thing that happens in our lives, and some days and weeks it was harder than others. I remember the first episode we tried to put out, it was like a frantic, oh god, it's 11:30 at night, shit, we got to put this in, oh my gosh, how did we post this? And it's starting to feel more fluid, and I think so much of that has been from the work and input that you all have had in here. And I think for me too, the other part I wanted to speak to of this is that want and need to do the best, and to say, I want to put my all into something like this. And I know everybody wanted to push harder on what that particularly looked like. And I thought that the work that you all put in here was far exceeded what I thought would happen. And I think that just speaks to y'all's character. And so thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And I think I was going to mention this earlier, but I think one thing that stood out to me through this whole process too was just, I feel like it's so common nowadays to start a podcast and everyone wants to start one, but I don't think people truly realize how hard it is and all the different steps that have to happen in order to do that. And I think you and Christy both managed that really well. And I know there is a lot of stuff that you have outside of this. And so I think I was just really impressed that you were still really committed to this, even though you have outside things going on, and you really wanted to make this happen. And I think that shows to your characters as well.
No, you guys are great.
Yeah, that's kind of what's happening right now.
We can keep going.
Yeah, so not to fall out of line with a disability tangent or tangents in general, I think we hit the things that we had intended to today.
Beautiful.
Join us next time for a thought-provoking episode as we unpack what the woke agenda means for disability communities.
We'll dive deep into the impact of anti-DEI policies, exploring how they're setting back decades of progress for disability rights around the world.
Don't miss out on this important but difficult conversation. Are you passionate about accessibility and inclusion but don't know who to connect with? We welcome you to join the Global Accessibility and Inclusion Network, founded by the creators of the Disability Tangent podcast.
Our mission is simple: to connect communities to available resources and create a supportive network of individuals from all backgrounds. Join us as we unite disability advocates from around the world to share knowledge, collaborate on initiatives, and drive positive change.
Whether you're an experienced activist or just starting your journey, there's a place for you in our network. To learn more and become part of this powerful movement, check out the show notes for this episode and sign up today.
Together, let's make the world a more accessible and inclusive place for everyone.
Beautiful.
Your turn.
Honestly, I did not know about the diving thing. How have we not talked about this? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Sydney was like very up there. All-American. She's won a lot of diving meets and everything.
What?
She's really underplaying
You
herself
are so
right now.
humble. Oh my goodness. Listen, if I had something like
You
that,
would say
every
it
chance
every
I
day.
get, I'd be like, my Zoom would be on. Oh yeah, sorry. Did you see? Oh, so let me just move my many awards out of
Oh,
the
my
way.
medals are in the back.
You'd just be wearing them.
Yeah, exactly, Chris. It would just every time. Oh, sorry if you hear a little clanking. It's just how great I am. Oh, but seriously, that's amazing.
Thank you. It's funny. I recently got married and I moved into an apartment with my husband, and he wanted to have an award shelf, and I said, absolutely not. It will go in the closet. Thank you.
Like, welcome to our apartment. Here's a tour of all our medals.
This is our foyer of victory.
I feel self-conscious.
Awesome.